One of the first things we expect to get from government is transparency, because without transparency, you can't get accountability. And without accountability, the whole show falls apart, doesn't it? And yet today we learn that Scott Morrison was just about the minister for everything when he was in power. Now, let's be clear. Under the Westminster system, ministers have legal authority over a whole range of areas. Often there is an enormous power that rests simply on a minister's decision. And sure, the Prime Minister has enormous authority by chairing Cabinet, so that most of the time, significant decisions taken by ministers are taken by Cabinet, and therefore usually reflect the wishes of the Prime Minister. But while Cabinet documents and discussions are secret, we always know who is responsible for what. Any ministerial arrangements are made public. We usually have media in the room when the ministers are sworn in by the Governor-General. It is open. Voters know who is responsible. That is vital. But it seems we've been treated like mushrooms. Even former coalition ministers have been kept in the dark. The revelations have come as a result of exclusive details in this book, plagued by my colleagues at the Australian newspaper, Simon Benson and Jeff Chambers. It tells the story of governing during the pandemic. It turns out that as Prime Minister, Scott Morrison had himself sworn in to a range of other portfolios: Health Minister, Finance Minister, Resources Minister. Sometimes the ministers apparently knew about this, such as the then Health Minister, Greg Hunt. But others, such as the then Finance Minister, Matthias Cormann, apparently didn't even know. Now, you might be able to make a case for this doubling up of responsibility in a crisis. It's a big ask, in my view, because it's always easy to swear in new ministers or acting ministers if someone's out of action. But if you did make out a case that it was necessary for the Prime Minister to have, under law, the specific powers of a range of other ministers, then there still is a fundamental principle that's been completely ignored here: transparency. The ministers needed to know. The Cabinet needed to know. The Parliament needed to know. And most importantly, the public, the electorate, we needed to know. The lack of transparency is extraordinary.
Did you know Scott Morrison was appointed by the Governor-General to take control of your entire department at the time, and that of Angus Taylor?
Oh, look, that's clearly not decisions that I was involved with. Generally, that would be a discussion between the two leaders of the parties in coalition. And look, I'm sure over a period of time those things will come to the light.
A former Resources Minister, a former Cabinet Minister, unaware that the Prime Minister had secretly assumed power over his department under law. The truth is that there's a lot of wriggle room about how Cabinet government can work. Sometimes Prime Ministers can be virtual dictators. Sometimes they can give their whole cabinets a vote on everything. And sometimes, as was the case in the first Kevin Rudd government, a gang of 4 ministers can make most of the decisions in place of the Cabinet. But these revelations provide a new and disturbing twist. Now, we haven't heard from Scott Morrison. I've reached out to him without a response. We need to hear his explanation. I expect he would claim that his ministers had extraordinary power during the pandemic and they ought to share it. Maybe that also shows how we gave governments far too much power in the pandemic. But whatever the argument or justification is, the bottom line is that you have to be open about them, with your own colleagues, with voters. The Governor-General has essentially confirmed all this, saying he swore in the Prime Minister to a range of portfolios under advice, of course, from the Prime Minister and without public ceremonies. The current Prime Minister is astonished.
Australians knew during the election campaign that I was running a shadow ministry. What they didn't know was that Scott Morrison was running a shadow government that was operating in the shadows. This isn't some, local footy club. This is the government of Australia, where the people of Australia were kept in the dark as to what the ministerial arrangements were. It's completely unacceptable.
Yeah, this is pretty staggering stuff. We'll hear plenty more in coming days. It's always unwise to give governments unfettered power. Hasn't the pandemic shown us that? Let's hope we learn the lessons.